New internal FIA documents have triggered a full investigation into Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari after shocking data emerged from the Qatar Grand Prix. The evidence reveals instability levels so extreme that FIA officials now believe the SF25 may have been operating outside its declared aerodynamic behavior during the race. This report exposes the exact moment Ferrari realized the car was fundamentally unsafe at high speed and why Hamilton described a race as a fight you would not believe. Before we break down the internal FIA findings and how they could affect Hamilton's future with Ferrari, make sure you subscribe because Abu Dhabi will determine whether this investigation escalates even further. The Qatar Grand Prix revealed the deepest structural crisis Ferrari has faced in more than a decade. Hamilton entered the race already frustrated after qualifying 17th following a park firm breach intended to stabilize the car. Yet even with the revised setup, the SF25 behaved like a machine disconnected from its own aerodynamic map. From the opening laps, Hamilton reported unpredictable rear movement, sudden snaps on exit, and a level of bouncing under braking that made it impossible for him to lean on the car at medium and high speed. The FIA's interest intensified when telemetry showed a millimetric separation between the floor and rear suspension. This tiny disconnection created rapid downforce loss through sectors 2 and 3, turning the SF25 into a car that alternated between understeer on entry and violent oversteer on exit. That instability mirrored the porpoising phenomenon of 2022, except now it appeared in isolated braking zones such as turn 10 rather than full straight-line oscillations. For a 7-time world champion to describe the experience as a fight you would not believe highlights how far outside normal operating parameters the car had moved. The early safety car offered no relief. Hamilton lacked the grip necessary to attack and lost time even on fresh hard tires. Alpine and Williams passed him with ease, proving that Ferrari's deficit was not situational but structural. The internal report notes that Ferrari ran between 0.8 and 1 second and 0.2 slower per lap than McLaren and Red Bull, a margin that cannot be explained by tires or fuel load alone. It confirms a full breakdown in mechanical grip and aerodynamic consistency that placed Hamilton and Leclerc outside the competitive window entirely. Radio messages during the race illustrated a driver fighting the car, not the competitors. Mid-race, Hamilton warned that the rear was going everywhere, and that the changes Ferrari made had somehow made the situation worse. By the final laps, he accepted that the car had no speed at any stage of the race. His frustration became resignation, a clear signal that he no longer believed any setup solution existed for the SF25 in its current form. Charles Leclerc's race confirmed the scale of the crisis. Even with cleaner air and a more stable rear, he salvaged only 10th place and described the car as slow, unstable, and embarrassing compared to midfield teams. His explosive complaint zero grip echoed Hamilton's assessment. Both drivers identified the same pattern of unpredictability, proving the problem was not individual but structural. Ferrari's confidence collapsed during the weekend to the point where even internal engineers admitted the SF25 had correlation errors too large to repair in season. Team principal Fred Vasseur attempted to take institutional responsibility. He acknowledged that Ferrari froze development in April to prioritize the 2026 project, a decision that left the SF25 exposed during the most demanding phase of the season. He also criticized the release of selective radio messages that created false narratives of driver conflict. According to Vasseur, Hamilton and Leclerc were united in their assessment that the car lacked stability and coherence. This combination of aerodynamic instability, mechanical inconsistency, and structural unpredictability is the reason the FIA has begun evaluating the SF25's internal data. While no rule breach is being suggested, officials want to understand why the car produced behaviors outside Ferrari's declared model. Qatar confirmed that Hamilton was not simply slow. He was driving a machine struggling to maintain structural integrity under high-speed load. 12th place was not a poor performance. It was the only possible outcome for a car fundamentally misaligned with the demands of modern Formula One. The FIA now wants to know how deep the problem goes and whether Ferrari can guarantee safety and stability in the final race of the season. Ferrari's fundamental problem in Qatar began the moment Lewis Hamilton rolled out onto a track that immediately exposed the SF25's deepest structural weaknesses. Even on the installation laps, the rear instability was visible in the telemetry, with load distribution shifting unpredictably between the floor and the rear axle. This instability made the car feel light on entry and disconnected on exit, a sensation Hamilton described as impossible to trust. When a Formula One car loses aerodynamic coherence, the driver no longer receives consistent feedback, and the entire machine behaves as if it is built from mismatched components. That was the reality Hamilton faced before completing even a single competitive lap. The second dimension of the problem emerged from the braking behavior that deteriorated as Hamilton increased pace. The SF25 bounced under deceleration at turn 10, a sign that the suspension frequency was not synchronized with the aerodynamic load transfer. This created sudden compressions that caused the tires to break traction. The effect is severe because it forces the driver to brake earlier, turn more gently, and abandon any aggressive racing line. For Hamilton, this meant sacrificing performance in an entire section of the circuit. Once a car cannot brake consistently, it stops being a race tool and becomes something the driver must simply survive. A third layer of the crisis was Ferrari's decision to brake park firm. This is only done when a team realizes the car is structurally incapable of completing a competitive race with the existing setup. Ferrari reopened the SF25 in an attempt to rebuild its platform, but the adjustments function more like emergency repairs than performance solutions. Even after these changes, Hamilton reported that the car still felt disconnected. The fact that both Hamilton and the engineers saw no improvement confirmed that the problem did not originate with the setup. The issue was embedded in the mechanical and aerodynamic foundations of the car. A fourth element of the problem involved the magnitude of the pace deficit. Ferrari expected to be in the same performance bracket as Mercedes and Aston Martin, yet Hamilton lost close to a full second per lap to the leading group and struggled even against Alpine and Williams. In modern Formula One, a deficit of that size indicates a structural aerodynamic mismatch rather than a bad day or a tire misjudgment. The SF25 lacked front grip, lacked rear stability, and lacked the aerodynamic efficiency to defend on the straights. These combined weaknesses produced a race in which Hamilton had no realistic tools to fight any competitor. The fifth problem lay in tire degradation. Because Hamilton was fighting instability rather than attacking the circuit, his tires overheated through constant micro slides. Engineers attempted changes through differential settings and corner entry instructions, but the thermal behavior remained unstable. A Formula One car that overheats its tires while running slower than expected becomes unmanageable over long distances. The tires lose grip at the same time the car demands more from them to compensate for its imbalance. Hamilton was locked into this cycle within the first third of the race, guaranteeing that his performance would only worsen. A sixth problem appeared through Hamilton's communication with the team. His radio messages reflected a driver not battling competitors, but fighting to keep the car within the limits of control. When he said that the rear was going everywhere, he was describing a car with no stable rotation point. When he added that the changes made everything worse, he revealed that Ferrari had reached the limit of what could be corrected in race conditions. These messages created a clear picture. The SF25 was fundamentally unpredictable, something Hamilton had never experienced to this degree in his career. Finally, the seventh part of the problem is the one that triggered the internal FIA investigation. Telemetry from Hamilton's car displayed fluctuations in aerodynamic load that did not match Ferrari's declared model. This does not imply a rule violation, but it does suggest a structural issue large enough to raise safety concerns. The FIA wants to know why the car lost stability at specific points of the circuit, why braking produced oscillations, and why the platform failed to behave consistently. Qatar was not simply a bad performance. It was a full mechanical and aerodynamic failure that separated the SF25 from the behavior expected of a modern Formula One machine. Ferrari's engineering group entered a state of crisis control from the moment Hamilton completed his first race laps and confirmed that the SF25 was not responding to any of their predictive models. The earliest telemetry showed that aerodynamic load on the rear axle was shifting in a pattern that could not be stabilized through normal setup adjustments. Engineers were forced to prioritize safety first, performance second, because the instability Hamilton described was not a balance issue but a structural behavior abnormality. When a Formula One car produces inconsistent load numbers at high speed, engineers must rebuild their approach in real time. One of the earliest challenges for the engineering team was the braking instability that grew more pronounced as Hamilton increased pace. The car bounced entering turn 10 because the suspension was responding a fraction of a second out of sync with the aerodynamic platform. Engineers attempted modifications using brake migration adjustments and subtle changes to how the brake by wire system blended mechanical and electronic braking. These interventions were designed to smooth the load transfer during deceleration, but they could not resolve the deeper problem. Without a stable aerodynamic platform, the brakes continued to provoke oscillations that unsettled the car every lap. Another major challenge centered on tire behavior. The SF25 consumed its rear tires aggressively because the car demanded constant micro-corrections from Hamilton. Each correction forced the tire to regain grip under imperfect loads, generating heat spikes that damaged the surface. Engineers attempted to cool the tires through changes in differential settings, energy deployment reshaping, and corner entry instructions. However, they quickly realized that thermal problems were symptoms rather than causes. They could delay the onset of overheating, but could not prevent it because the underlying aerodynamic imbalance kept returning. Ferrari also had to cope with sector-by-sector aerodynamic variation that they could not fully explain. The SF25 behaved relatively predictably through the early sequence of corners, but the long radius curves in the middle sector exposed major weaknesses in floor stability. Engineers evaluated wind direction, track temperature, and load sensitivity, yet the data confirmed the issue originated in the car itself rather than environmental factors. This forced Hamilton to rely heavily on radio guidance as the team transmitted corner-by-corner expectations to help him anticipate the instability. Even with this support, the car continued to behave outside its model. Energy deployment management added further complexity. The SF25 lacked straight-line efficiency and required more battery used simply to defend against midfield cars. Engineers had to find a deployment cycle that allowed Hamilton to maintain a minimum competitiveness without exhausting the battery before the end of each lap. Because Hamilton was correcting instability mid-corner, he used more throttle modulation than expected, which disrupted energy harvesting patterns. The engineering team recalculated deployment profiles repeatedly, sometimes adjusting them 2 laps at a time just to keep the car in a survivable rhythm.